Alexander the Great possessed an alarming inability to sit still. Even as a teenager, his idea of a relaxing hobby was taming a massive, violent wild stallion that terrified grown men. Thanks to his royal upbringing in Macedonia, he enjoyed massive educational advantages. He spent his childhood absorbing advanced mathematics, memorizing epic poetry like the Iliad, and drilling in elite combat techniques, while other kids were just trying to survive antiquity. That intense education was put to the test early. His father, King Philip II, was unexpectedly assassinated. In an instant, the 20-year-old prince became the supreme ruler of Macedonia. Neighboring Greek city-states looked at this 20-year-old kid on the throne and saw a massive opportunity. They immediately launched an armed rebellion to cancel their submission to the Macedonian Empire. He didn't send diplomats. He marched his army straight to the rebel centers, smashed their cities to absolute rubble, and sold the survivors into slavery. He secured his father's territory with terrifying speed, but holding the status quo was never on his agenda. He was already looking past Greece, intending to take the rest of the map. He marched his forces across the water and aimed them straight at the wealthiest, most heavily armed superpower of the ancient world, the Persian Empire. On paper, this was an absurd mismatch. The Persian king, Darius III, fielded a massive, well-resourced military equipped with scythed chariots. Alexander had a much smaller, highly aggressive force, fueled by pure ambition. To close that gap, Alexander relied on a highly specific tactic. He formed his elite cavalry into a tight triangular wedge, striking straight through the static enemy lines and aiming directly at the Persian king himself. Faced with a direct high-speed cavalry charge, Darius panicked. He turned his chariot around and fled the battlefield so quickly that he left his entire army and his own family behind in the dust. With the Persian military fractured, Alexander kept moving down the coast. When fortified island cities refused to surrender, his engineers built massive land bridges straight out into the sea to siege them. By decisively crushing the largest empire on the board, what started as a regional border dispute morphed into a relentless campaign for global domination. His momentum eventually pushed him into Egypt. The locals there absolutely despised their Persian governors, so when the Macedonian army arrived, they were welcomed as liberators. The Egyptian priests went a step further, crowning him pharaoh and officially declaring him the literal son of a god. For a guy who rarely heard the word no, the ego boost was massive. But capturing territory is very different from holding it. He now faced the logistical nightmare of governing a sprawling, multi-ethnic map without triggering endless local revolts. His solution was rapid cultural assimilation. He started adopting foreign customs, dressing in flowy Persian pants, and demanding that everyone perform physical acts of bowing to him. The veteran Macedonian soldiers, who fought in practical tunics and viewed their king as a military peer, were intensely alienated by this shift to foreign, godlike behavior. In attempting to secure the obedience of millions of newly conquered people, he steadily eroded the loyalty and trust of the exact men who had put him in power in the first place. Instead of consolidating his massive gains, he pushed his men relentlessly eastward, marching them out of familiar terrain and straight into the hostile borders of India. The military environment there was terrifying. They were suddenly fighting massive, armored war elephants while slogging through thick mud and unrelenting monsoon rains. These soldiers had been walking away from home for 8 continuous years. Their armor was rusted, their sandals were literally falling apart, and their psychological endurance was completely tapped out. Finally, the army stopped. In a historic mutiny, the exhausted ranks went on strike and flatly refused to take another step forward for their king. Alexander responded by retreating to his tent and throwing a massive, days-long temper tantrum before ultimately conceding that they would turn around. You can design the perfect tactical system, but if it relies entirely on one person's limitless ambition, it will eventually shatter the physical limits of the human beings forced to operate it. The journey back was a grueling, deadly march through unforgiving desert landscapes. The surviving forces barely made it to the ancient city of Babylon to recover. Yet even after a mutiny and a near-disastrous retreat, Alexander was already drawing up fresh logistical plans for a massive new naval invasion of Arabia. He never gave the order to march. Following a wild night of heavy drinking, he fell suddenly and mysteriously ill. dying a few days later at exactly 32 years old. This chart shows the immediate aftermath. Because he spent his entire life expanding the borders rather than building a sustainable government, his top generals turned on each other and violently fractured the empire into competing territories. Driving yourself endlessly forward will certainly get your name written into the history books, but if you never figure out where the finish line is, that same drive will burn out your allies, break your foundation,